When a man mocked a teenage boy for sitting in first class, the entire plane went silent. But when the flight attendant revealed why the boy was there, even the bully couldn't hold back tears. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. You don't belong here. The man shouted across the aisle. The moment the businessman's voice rang through the first-class cabin, time seemed to freeze. Conversations halted, magazines slowly lowered, and earbuds were pulled out. The atmosphere, once calm and hushed, now buzzed with tension. All eyes turned to row 2A, where a sharply dressed man in a navy blue suit stood, pointing at someone in disbelief. "You're in the wrong seat, buddy," he barked. "This isn't economy." Sitting beside the window, an older man, maybe in his late 60s, looked up slowly. His eyes were tired, hollow, as if they hadn't truly rested in years. His clothes were mismatched, faded, and his coat had patches where the fabric had worn thin. He looked like someone who had spent more time working with his hands than sitting in plush leather seats. Clutched tightly in his calloused fingers was a crumpled boarding pass. He barely met the man's eyes as he said in a quiet, firm voice, "This is my seat." But the businessman wasn't backing down. "There's no way you paid for this. Look at you. You don't belong here. You don't even look like you've flown before, let alone sat in first class." A murmur spread through the cabin like wildfire today. Woman in the next row adjusted her sunglasses and leaned forward, trying to get a better look. A young man across the aisle turned down the volume on his headphones. Even the flight attendant, who had been helping someone stow luggage at the back, hurried forward with concern on her face. "Sir," she said gently, approaching the two men, "is there a problem? This guy's clearly sitting in the wrong seat." The businessman snapped, motioning toward the older man. "I paid nearly $1,000 for this flight, and now I have to sit next to that? Check his ticket." The older man's hands trembled slightly as he extended his boarding pass to the attendant. She scanned it quickly, then looked up at the businessman with calm professionalism. "His seat is 2A, she confirmed. "He's exactly where he's supposed to be." The businessman blinked, caught off guard. "That's impossible," he muttered. "There must be a mistake." But there wasn't. The flight attendant politely but firmly asked him to return to his seat. He did so with a huff, still muttering under his breath. As he sat down, he shot one final glare at the older man. Unbelievable. The older man didn't react. He simply turned to look out the window, clutching the boarding pass like it was something sacred, something more than just paper. Though the immediate conflict had ended, the damage was done. The eyes of nearly the entire cabin lingered on the old man. Some were filled with confusion, others with quiet judgment. A few looked guilty for having assumed the worst. To them, it didn't make sense. What was someone like him doing in first class? No designer luggage, no briefcase, no luxury watch. His shoes were scuffed, soles nearly falling apart. His face was worn, not with age alone, but with something heavier, a kind of grief that sits in the bones. And yet, he sat quietly, with a quiet dignity that couldn't be faked. The whispers began again. Maybe it was an upgrade. Maybe he's some rich guy just dressed down. Or a lottery winner. The possibilities were endless, yet none felt quite right. The businessman next to him crossed his arms and looked away, still stewing, still judging. But what no one in that cabin knew was that the man hadn't just bought that seat for comfort. He hadn't come for luxury or status. He hadn't even chosen it himself. That seat, 2A, was more than just a place to sit. It was a gift, a final wish, a promise fulfilled. And the story behind it would soon silence every whisper and open every heart in that cabin. The old man sank into his seat quietly, the soft leather hugging his thin frame. His coat, patched at the elbows and frayed around. The cuffs looked like it had seen decades of winters. His shoes, dusty and cracked at the edges, carried the wear of someone who had walked through more hardships than holidays. The small carry-on bag he tucked under the seat in front of him was barely holding together. Duct tape wrapped around the zippers, and one of the handles dangled by a thread. In contrast, the cabin shimmered with wealth and comfort. Passengers wore crisp suits and designer scarves. Some were already sipping champagne, tapping away on sleek MacBooks or scrolling through phones with the latest titanium casing. Bags that probably cost more than a month's rent sat comfortably in overhead compartments. Even the scent of the air, leather, cologne, and catered meals spoke of privilege. And then there was him. He looked like a man who had stumbled into the wrong world. Some passengers avoided eye contact, shifting awkwardly in their seats, pretending not to notice. Others whispered behind raised hands. A few openly stared, eyebrows raised in confusion or subtle amusement that a teenage girl across the aisle leaned toward her mother and murmured, "Why is he in first class?" The mother gently hushed her but didn't take her eyes off the man. Even after the flight attendant confirmed his boarding pass and apologized for the scene, the mood in the cabin didn't lift. The businessman, now sitting beside the old man, sighed heavily and muttered, "Unbelievable," loud enough for several rows to hear. N01 defended the man. No one said a kind word. They just watched. The old man didn't react to any of it. He didn't argue or try to explain himself. He simply gave a quiet nod to the flight attendant, folded his hands in his lap, and looked out the window. But if anyone had looked a little closer, they might have seen it to flicker in his eyes. A depth, not of anger or embarrassment, but sorrow. A kind of silent pain that doesn't come from being judged by strangers, but from carrying something much heavier, a loss, a burden, a memory. And yet, there was a quiet dignity in him, too, like he had known this moment would come and had made peace with it long ago. The businessman beside him kept shifting in his seat, visibly uncomfortable with the presence of someone who didn't fit his picture of first class. He stared at his phone, fumbled with his tray table, glanced toward the flight attendant as if waiting for her to realize she had made a mistake. But there was no mistake. The old man was exactly where he was meant to be. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep, but perhaps to escape, maybe to revisit a memory, or maybe to talk silently to someone he missed. Minutes passed. The plane taxied slowly toward the runway. Outside, the sun was setting, a golden hue casting soft reflections on the windows. Inside, the glow touched the man's face. It made the wrinkles around his eyes look deeper, like the rings of an old tree, full of stories, of years lived, of battles fought, some seen, many invisible. Still, no one knew the truth. To them, he was just a man out of place, a curiosity, a question mark. But this flight wasn't just a trip for him. It was something much more personal. This was a promise kept, a farewell journey, the closing of a chapter written in tears, love, and sacrifice. And though he sat in silence, surrounded by people who had already made up their minds about him, his presence would soon change everything. Because when the truth finally came out, not one person in that cabin would see him the same way again. 2 hours had passed since the flight left the ground. The cabin had grown quiet. Most passengers were either asleep, watching movies with headphones on, or flipping through the in-flight magazine with glazed eyes. But in seat 2A, the old man hadn't moved much. He sat upright, his hands resting on his lap. His fingers, though aged and shaky, had the kind of strength you get from a lifetime of hard work, of building, lifting, surviving. Then, slowly, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. It was worn at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed 100 times. The flap was tucked in, but not sealed, like someone wanted to keep it safe without locking it away completely. He held it there for a moment, just looking at it. Not rushing, not nervous, just still, as if even touching it carried weight. Finally, he opened it. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper. The handwriting was neat but slightly uneven, written in blue ink that had bled just a little in certain places, probably from the trace of a tear, or maybe the moisture of being held too tightly. The man unfolded the paper with care, treating it like something fragile, sacred. His hands trembled as he brought the letter to his chest. He closed his eyes, breathed in deeply through his nose, and then opened them again. When he began to read, his lips moved silently with each word, as if speaking to the one who had written it. As the plane cruised 35,000 feet above the world, his mind was far from the clouds. It was somewhere else, perhaps in the past, or maybe in a memory too precious to speak aloud. A flight attendant, the same kind woman who had helped him earlier, happened to pass by. She noticed his expression, soft and full of something more than sorrow. She paused for a moment, watching him with gentle curiosity. He must have sensed her presence because he looked up. His eyes glistened with emotion, but they weren't pleading. They were offering. Would you like to know why I'm here? He asked softly, almost in a whisper, as if unsure whether anyone would really want to hear his story. She knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on the armrest between them, and nodded. I'd love to, she said, her voice quiet and respectful. He turned the letter toward her, though he didn't let go of it. His fingers still gripped the paper like it was part of him. My son wrote this a week before he passed, he began. His voice was steady, but just barely. The attendant's smile faded into something more solemn. She glanced at the letter but focused on his face. He was in the military. The man continued. Only child. My pride. My best friend. He paused to clear his throat, blinking quickly. He used to tell me, one day, Dad, I'm going to buy you a first-class ticket. Just once. So you can see what it feels like to be treated special. He chuckled lightly, eyes looking off, into the distance. We used to laugh about it. Said he'd do it after his first promotion. The attendant remained still, her heart clearly sinking. He never made it to that promotion, the old man said, his voice quieter now. A roadside bomb. They said he didn't suffer. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. He folded the letter halfway, pressing it gently to his chest once again. But before he died, he'd already booked this seat. He used his leave pay to buy it for me, left the ticket with the letter and told his captain, make sure my dad gets this. He let out a shaky breath. This trip was meant to be ours. But now it's just me. For a moment, the world inside that airplane paused. The hum of the engines faded into the background. The harsh light softened. The invisible lines between strangers blurred. The flight attendant's eyes were full of tears. She reached out and gently touched the man's hand. Thank you for telling me, she whispered. And thank you for raising someone who gave everything. He nodded slowly, wiping the corner of his eye. I just wanted to feel close to him, even for a few hours. And with that, he turned his gaze back to the letter. As he read it again, silently mouthing each word, the truth of why he was there slowly began to ripple through the cabin. Starting with one person who truly listened. The cabin was still dim, the soft overhead lights casting a gentle glow. Most passengers had settled into their routines, movies, snacks, naps. But that peace was about to shift. The flight attendant, now sitting quietly beside the old man, leaned in with quiet attention. The old man's voice was low, but steady, carried more by emotion than volume. My son was in the military, he began. He always promised he'd take me on a plane ride one day. First class. Said he'd save up for it once he made it. The flight attendant gave a small nod, her eyes softening. But it wasn't just her who was listening anymore. That a man across the aisle had removed one earbud. A woman a row behind subtly paused her movie. Another passenger quietly put down a magazine. Without realizing it, people were tuning in, not out. The old man continued, his gaze distant, but his voice full of memory. He was proud. Said he wanted me to experience something different, something nice. I always laughed it off. Told him I didn't need any of that. He paused, eyes blinking back the heaviness. But he kept saying it. Said, one day, Dad. First class, just for you. He looked down for a moment, folding and unfolding the corner of the letter in his lap. But he never made it back home, he said, barely above a whisper. He died in service 3 months ago. There was a gasp. Just one. Soft and involuntary. But it was enough. Conversations halted. Screens were paused. Even the hum of the plane seemed to fade beneath the weight of his words. The businessman, who had earlier mocked him, shifted in his seat, now turned slightly toward the man, his expression unreadable. The old man didn't look at anyone. He simply reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small photograph, edges worn and creased from being handled too often. I in the picture. A young soldier, grinning wide, his arm wrapped proudly around the man now seated into it. He held it out for the flight attendant to see. This was his last photo before deployment, he said. Said he wanted me to keep it close so I'd never feel alone. The flight attendant gently took the photo, studying it as tears welled in her eyes. She handed it back with both hands, as if returning a piece of someone's soul. He had already bought this ticket for me, the old man added. Said it was a gift. Said I deserved to feel special, just once. His voice cracked on the last words. A long silence fell over the cabin. The judgment, the whispers, the stares, every unkind thought that had floated through the first-class section earlier melted into shame, into sorrow, and slowly, one by one, the passengers responded in the only way that felt right. The woman across the aisle dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The teenage girl who had once questioned his presence now looked down, hugging her arms tightly. Even the businessman, the same one who had mocked the old man for his worn coat and duct-taped bag, looked away, face flushed. His jaw clenched, his eyes glassy. He turned slowly in his seat, facing the man he had shamed just hours ago. I'm sorry, he said quietly, the words stiff and raw. I didn't know. The old man simply gave a small nod. He wasn't angry. He hadn't been, not even at the beginning. That was the thing about grief. It changes what matters. Petty insults can't pierce a heart already cracked by loss. I just wanted to feel close to him, the man said. Even if it's just for one flight. His fingers wrapped around the photo again, holding it close. And he wanted me to be here, to be seen, to be honored. That's why I'm in first class. No one questioned it after that. No one looked at him like he didn't belong. Because now they knew he belonged there more than anyone. He wasn't just flying first class. He was flying with purpose, with love, with memory, and with the pride of a son who had given everything to give his father one unforgettable seat in the sky. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and the plane slowly rolled along the runway. The familiar ding of the seatbelt sign echoed through the cabin. But this time, there was no rush to stand. No frantic grabbing for overhead bags or elbowing through the aisle. Something was different in the hours that had passed since takeoff. The old man in seat 2A had gone from a quiet, unnoticed passenger to the heart of the entire flight. He hadn't demanded attention. He hadn't asked for anything. But by simply sharing his story, by quietly honoring his son, he had touched every single soul on that plane. People saw him now, not just with their eyes, but with their hearts. The businessman, who had once spat cruel words about how the man didn't belong, stood up as soon as the plane stopped. But this time, it wasn't to hurry off or to judge. He turned to the old man with a humbled expression. "Sir," he said, his voice more careful now, more human. "I'm sorry. I had no right to treat you that way." The old man looked up, eyes calm, voice soft. "Apology accepted," he said with a gentle nod. There was no bitterness in his tone, no anger, just grace. The businessman looked down, then reached out his hand. They shook, and for a brief moment, two completely different lives connected through a simple act of understanding. As passengers began to gather their belongings, something extraordinary happened. They didn't just walk past him. They stopped one by one. They paused at his seat. A young woman knelt slightly to his level and said, "Thank you for your son's service and for sharing his story." A middle-aged man placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "My brother served. He didn't come home either. I get it." Even the teenage girl who had once whispered questions to her mother stood near him, eyes watery. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "But thank you." Some offered simple nods. Others gave a small pat on the back or touched his arm briefly, not needing to say anything at all. Their faces said it all: respect, sorrow, gratitude. The flight attendant who had sat with him earlier now stood at the front of the cabin, silently watching the ripple effect his story had created. She wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was witnessing something rare. A plane full of strangers united by the truth of a father's love and a son's sacrifice. And then the most unexpected moment came. The cockpit door opened, and the captain himself stepped out. In full uniform. With calm authority and a quiet reverence, he made his way down the aisle. Not to hurry passengers, not to give instructions, but for one man, he stopped at seat 2A and extended his hand. "Sir," he said with solemn respect, "on behalf of the entire crew, and as a fellow American, thank you. Your son's service and your strength mean more than words can say." The old man stood slowly, shaking the captain's hand firmly. He didn't say much, just a simple, "Thank you, Captain." But the meaning in that exchange was deep, far beyond formalities. This wasn't just a flight anymore. The IT had become a tribute, not just to a fallen soldier, but to all the silent promises carried by people we pass every day without noticing. It was a moment where humanity cut through class, status, and appearance. As the old man exited the plane, his pace was slow, but purposeful. He walked alone through the gate area, But he wasn't lonely. Not anymore. That he walked like a man who had fulfilled a sacred promise. He didn't just sit in first class. He carried someone with him. He flew with love in his pocket, honor in his hands, and a memory too powerful for any seat to contain. People watched him go, and not a single one saw someone out of place. They saw a father, a man of quiet strength, a reminder of what truly matters, and a story that none of them would forget, not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. And sometimes it only takes one quiet heart to remind an entire cabin what respect, love, and honor really look like. Folded hands, thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Speech Balloon D.